You find yourself walking down a quiet country road as the evening mist begins to settle. The air carries the scent of autumn leaves and distant wood smoke. Tonight we journey together into one of America's most enduring mysteries, the tale of a rider who lost more than just his way home. Close your eyes and let your mind drift back through time, back to when the Hudson River Valley was still wild and untamed, when shadows held different meanings and every creaking branch told a story. You are standing now in what would one day be called Sleepy Hollow, but tonight it is simply a valley where Dutch settlers have built their lives between rolling hills and whispering streams. The year is 1790, and the Revolutionary War is still fresh in everyone's memory. The valley has always been a place of strange happenings. Long before European settlers arrived, the native Lenape people spoke of spirits that wandered these woods. They called this place a dreaming ground, where the veil between worlds grew thin when the moon was dark. You can feel it in the air tonight, that peculiar heaviness that settles over certain places, the way sound travels differently here, how your footsteps seem to echo longer than they should, how shadows appear to move just at the edge of your vision. The Dutch colonists who settled here brought their own stories from the old country, tales of spectral horsemen who rode through European forests on stormy nights. These stories found fertile ground in the Hudson Valley, where mist clung to the hollows and ancient trees seemed to whisper secrets. Imagine yourself in a one-room schoolhouse as winter wind rattles the windows. The year is 1820, and a young schoolmaster named Washington Irving sits by the fire, listening to the local farmers share their tales. Irving has a writer's ear for a good story, and tonight the conversation has turned to the strange happenings in the valley. An old Dutch farmer leans forward, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of warm cider. His voice carries the accent of his homeland as he speaks of the headless rider who haunts the old church road. "My grandfather, he tell me this story," the farmer says, his words slow and measured. "During the war there was a Hessian soldier, a horseman who rode with such skill they say he could cut down 3 men with a single swing of his sabre." You settle back in your chair, feeling the warmth of the fire on your face. The wind outside grows stronger, and somewhere in the distance, what did he look like? The answers come slowly, passed down through generations of storytellers. Each person who tells the tale adds their own small details. A farmer who swears he saw the rider near the old bridge. A miller's wife who claims to have heard hoofbeats with no horse in sight. A child who glimpsed a dark figure riding beneath the full moon. You walk now through Irving's imagination as he crafts his famous story. You can almost see him at his writing desk, candle flickering in the late night hours, as he weaves together the threads of local folklore into something new. Irving understands something important about ghost stories. They work best when they feel real, when they are rooted in actual places that readers might know or visit. So he sets his tale right here in Sleepy Hollow, using real locations and the names of real families. But Irving does something clever. He tells his story through the eyes of a skeptic. His narrator claims to have heard the tale secondhand, adding layers of doubt and uncertainty. Was the Headless Horseman real? Or was he simply the product of overactive imaginations and too much hard cider? This uncertainty becomes part of the legend's power. Irving never definitively says whether the ghost is real or not. He leaves room for doubt, which paradoxically makes the story feel more believable. After all, the best ghost stories are the ones that leave you wondering. You find yourself walking down the same country road where we began our journey, but now you see it through different eyes. Every shadow could hide a mystery. Every distant sound might be hoofbeats approaching through the mist. Let us step back in time once more, to the actual Revolutionary War battles that took place in this valley. You stand now on a battlefield where real soldiers fought and died. The year is 1776, and the air is filled with smoke and the sound of musket fire. The Hessian soldiers were German mercenaries, hired by the British to fight in the American colonies. They were professional soldiers, well-trained and disciplined. Many of them were excellent horsemen, skilled with both sword and pistol. Among them were officers who wore distinctive helmets and rode fine horses. These men were proud of their military bearing and their skill in battle. Some carried sabres that could indeed cut down multiple opponents with skillful swordwork. But war is chaotic and unpredictable. Cannonballs flew through the air with devastating, creating ghosts. The living need to believe that the dead do not simply vanish without a trace. You find yourself standing now at a small stone bridge that crosses a quiet stream. This is the bridge where Irving's Headless Horseman was said to appear and disappear. Water has always been significant in folklore. Streams and rivers mark boundaries between one realm and another. The bridge itself is unremarkable, just old stones fitted together by long-dead craftsmen. But it occupies a special place in the geography of the supernatural. Here, according to the legend, the ghostly rider reaches the limits of his haunting grounds. Here, he must turn back or vanish entirely. You can hear the water flowing beneath the bridge, a constant murmuring that seems to whisper secrets in a language you almost understand. The sound is hypnotic, the kind of noise that makes your mind drift and wander. Local people avoid this bridge after dark even now, not because they necessarily believe in ghosts, but because the story has become part of the landscape itself. The legend has shaped how people see and experience this place. This is how urban legends work. They attach themselves to specific locations, becoming part of the local identity. The story and the place become inseparable. You cannot visit Sleepy Hollow without thinking of the Headless Horseman, just as you cannot tell the story without picturing these rolling hills and misty hollows. You settle into a comfortable chair by a warm fire as we explore why stories like this one have such enduring power. There is something in the human mind that craves mystery and wonder. We tell ghost stories not because we want to be frightened, but because we want to believe there is more to existence than what we can see and touch. The Headless Horseman represents something primal in our collective unconscious. He is the warrior who cannot rest, the soul caught between life and death, the reminder that violence leaves invisible wounds on the landscape itself. But there is comfort in these stories too. They suggest that death is not the end, that consciousness persists in some form beyond the grave. Even if that persistence takes a frightening shape, it offers a kind of hope. The dead are not simply gone, they continue in some mysterious way. Ghost stories also serve a social function. They bring communities together through shared narratives. When people gather to tell tales of local hauntings, they are reinforced short stories. But Irving has done more than simply record local folklore. He has transformed it into something larger and more complex. Irving's story is not really about ghosts at all. It is about the clash between rationality and superstition, between the old world and the new. His protagonist, Ichabod Crane, represents the educated, superstitious outsider who fails to understand the practical wisdom of rural folk. The story can be read as comedy or horror, depending on your perspective. Irving deliberately leaves the ending ambiguous. Did the Headless Horseman carry Ichabod away? Or was it simply Brom Bones playing an elaborate prank? The truth remains tantalizingly out of reach. This ambiguity is what gives the story its lasting power. Readers are free to interpret it according to their own beliefs and inclinations. Skeptics can see it as a satire of superstition. Believers can read it as a genuine ghost story. Both interpretations are valid. Irving also understood the importance of atmosphere in supernatural fiction. His descriptions of the Hudson Valley create a mood of dreamy mystery that makes anything seem possible. The landscape itself becomes a character in the story, shaping events through its mysterious influence. You watch now as Irving's story spreads beyond its original audience. Published in 1820, the legend of Sleepy Hollow quickly becomes popular throughout America and Europe. The tale is reprinted in newspapers and magazines, told and retold in countless variations. Each telling adds new details or changes existing ones. The Headless Horseman becomes more frightening in some versions, more sympathetic in others. Some storytellers emphasize the comedy, while others play up the horror. The legend adapts to different audiences and different times. By the mid-1800s, the story has become so well known that tourists begin visiting Sleepy Hollow, specifically to see the locations mentioned in Irving's tale. The old church, the bridge, the hollow itself, all become pilgrimage sites for lovers of American literature. Local guides develop their own versions of the story, often claiming to have inside knowledge or family connections to the original events. They point out graveyards where the Headless Horseman is supposedly buried, or roads where he has been recently spotted. The legend begins to take on a life of its own, separate from Irving's original story. People claim new sightings of the ghostly rider. new variations of his origin story,
while more adult adaptations explore its darker psychological themes. Each medium finds new ways to interpret and present the classic tale. Hollywood discovers the commercial potential of the Headless Horseman, producing multiple film versions over the decades. Some stay close to Irving's original story, while others use the character as inspiration for entirely new narratives. The ghostly rider becomes a recognizable icon of American horror. Theme parks and Halloween attractions embrace the legend as well. The Headless Horseman becomes a reliable source of seasonal scares, his image appearing on everything from decorations to candy packaging. The character transcends his literary origins to become part of popular culture. But something interesting happens in this process of commercialization. The legend becomes both more familiar and more distant. Everyone knows who the Headless Horseman is, but fewer people remember the subtle complexities of Irving's original story. You walk now through modern-day Sleepy Hollow as autumn tourists arrive to experience the legend for themselves. The town has embraced its supernatural heritage, offering ghost tours and Halloween festivals that draw visitors from around the world. Tour guides lead groups through the historic cemetery, pointing out graves that may or may not have any connection to Irving's story. They show visitors the old church and the famous bridge, now reconstructed, but occupying the same symbolic space in the local mythology. Some tourists come as skeptics, curious about the literary history, but not expecting to encounter anything supernatural. Others arrive hoping for a genuine ghost sighting, cameras ready to capture evidence of the paranormal. The modern tourist experience of the legend is quite different from what Irving described. The Hudson Valley is no longer the isolated rural area it once was. Development has changed the landscape, and roads that once seemed lonely and remote now carry steady traffic. Yet something of the original atmosphere persists. When mist rises from the river on autumn evenings, when shadows lengthen across old graveyards, when bare tree branches create strange silhouettes against the sky, you can still feel the presence of the old stories. The legend has become a lens through which people experience this landscape. Even those who do not believe in ghosts find themselves looking for signs of the supernatural when they visit Sleepy Hollow. The story has shaped perception in subtle but persistent ways. You sit now in a university class environments. The Headless Horseman becomes part of a larger pattern of supernatural beliefs that crossed the Atlantic with the colonists. Literary scholars examine Irving's story as an early example of American regional fiction, noting how he used local colour and folklore to create something distinctly American. The tale represents a turning point in American literature, when writers began looking to their own landscapes and traditions for inspiration. Anthropologists study how the legend reflects broader cultural anxieties about death, war, and social change. The Headless Horseman can be seen as a symbol of displacement and cultural trauma, representing the psychological wounds left by conflict and colonization. Psychologists explore why headless ghost stories have such universal appeal. The image of a person without a head taps into deep-seated fears about identity and consciousness. What makes us who we are? What happens to the self when the body is damaged or destroyed? These academic perspectives add layers of meaning to the simple ghost story. They show how legends like this one can serve as repositories of cultural memory and collective anxiety, preserving important themes and concerns in narrative form. You feel now the pull of the seasons as autumn arrives once again in the Hudson Valley. There is something about October that makes ghost stories feel more real, more immediate. The changing leaves, the shorter days, the crisp air all contribute to a sense that the ordinary world is transforming into something more mysterious. This seasonal association is not accidental. Many cultures have connected autumn with death and the supernatural. It is the time when the natural world appears to be dying, when harvests are gathered and preparations are made for the long winter ahead. Halloween amplifies these associations, creating a socially sanctioned time for exploring fears and fantasies about death and the supernatural. The Headless Horseman has become one of the iconic figures of this season, appearing in decorations and celebrations throughout October. But the legend is not confined to Halloween. True believers report sightings of the ghostly rider throughout the year, though autumn encounters seem to be most common. There is something about the mist and shadows of fall that makes people more likely to see shapes that might not actually be there. The seasonal rhythm of the legend also reflects deeper patterns in human psychology. We need times when it is safe to explore our fears and anxieties about mortality. Ghost stories provide a controlled way to confront these difficult emotions. The Headless Horseman offers a particularly compelling
For the first time. Their version of the story is gentler than Irving's original, adapted to be thrilling without being truly frightening. Children's versions of the tale often emphasize the mystery and adventure rather than the horror. The Headless Horseman becomes more of a puzzle to be solved than a genuine threat. Young readers are encouraged to think about whether the ghost is real or just someone playing tricks. These adaptations serve an important function in child development. They provide a safe way for young people to explore concepts of death and the supernatural. The story becomes a bridge between the security of childhood and the more complex realities of adult existence. Teachers use the legend to discuss local history and folklore traditions. Students learn about the Revolutionary War and early American literature through the lens of this familiar story. The Headless Horseman becomes an educational tool as well as entertainment. Some children become fascinated with the legend and begin seeking out more information about ghosts and supernatural phenomena. The story serves as a gateway to broader interests in history, literature, and the paranormal. The simplified versions of the tale also demonstrate how legends adapt to different audiences. The core elements remain consistent, but the tone and emphasis shift depending on who is telling the story and who is listening. You travel now beyond American borders to see how the Headless Horseman legend has been received in other countries. Irving's story was translated into multiple languages and became popular throughout Europe, where readers recognized familiar elements from their own folklore traditions. German readers were particularly interested in the tale, perhaps because of its connection to Hessian soldiers. The story offered a different perspective on their countrymen who had fought as mercenaries in the American Revolution. It humanized these forgotten soldiers, while also acknowledging the consequences of their violent profession. British audiences appreciated Irving's literary skill and his use of atmospheric description. The story fit well within the Gothic tradition that was popular in 19th century British literature. It showed that American writers could create supernatural fiction that rivaled anything produced in Europe. French readers found the tale charming and exotic, representing a romantic vision of the American frontier. The Hudson Valley, as Irving described it, seemed both familiar and strange, civilized yet wild. As American culture became more globally influential in the 20th century, the Headless Horseman legend spread even further. Translations appeared in languages around after death. These concerns transcend cultural boundaries. You log on now to the internet to see how the Headless Horseman legend has adapted to the digital age. Online forums buzz with discussions of ghostly encounters and paranormal investigations. Websites catalogue alleged sightings and offer virtual tours of haunted locations. Social media has created new ways for the legend to spread and evolve. People share photos from visits to Sleepy Hollow, often claiming to have captured mysterious figures or unexplained phenomena. Video footage purporting to show the Headless Horseman circulates on various platforms, though the quality is usually too poor to be conclusive. Paranormal investigation shows on television have featured the Sleepy Hollow area multiple times, using electronic equipment to search for signs of supernatural activity. These programs treat the legend as potentially factual, approaching it with the tools and methods of scientific inquiry. Online games and virtual reality experiences allow people to encounter the Headless Horseman in interactive formats. Players can explore digital versions of Sleepy Hollow, searching for clues about the ghostly rider's identity and motivations. The internet has also enabled more scholarly discussion of the legend. Academic papers and research projects are easily accessible, allowing interested individuals to explore the historical and cultural dimensions of the story in unprecedented detail. Digital preservation efforts have made Irving's original text and early illustrations widely available. Modern readers can easily compare different versions of the story and trace its evolution over time. You settle into a comfortable chair as we explore the deeper psychological currents that keep legends like this one alive. Why do some people believe in the Headless Horseman, while others dismiss the story as mere fiction? What makes certain individuals more susceptible to supernatural experiences? Research in psychology suggests that belief in ghosts and paranormal phenomena is influenced by multiple factors. Personality traits like openness to experience and fantasy proneness can make people more likely to interpret ambiguous events as supernatural.
Environmental factors also play a role. Visiting atmospheric locations like old graveyards or isolated roads can create a heightened state of awareness that makes people more likely to notice unusual sights or sounds. The power of suggestion is particularly strong in such settings. Cultural background influences how people interpret unusual experiences. Those raised in families or communities where ghost stories are taken seriously, the story emotionally satisfying as a metaphor for unresolved trauma or unfinished business. The ambiguous nature of most alleged supernatural encounters allows people to interpret them according to their existing beliefs. A sound in the night might be the wind to a skeptic, but the approach of a ghostly rider to a believer. You walk now through a peaceful forest, as we consider how ghost stories like the Headless Horseman legend might serve therapeutic functions for individuals and communities. Psychologists have long recognized that narratives can help people process difficult emotions and experiences. The Headless Horseman story deals with themes of violence, death, and loss in a symbolic way that can be less threatening than direct confrontation with these realities. The supernatural framework provides distance that makes traumatic subjects more manageable. For veterans and their families, the legend might resonate as a representation of how war affects both the dead and the living. The image of a soldier who cannot rest speaks to concerns about PTSD and the lasting psychological wounds of combat. Communities that have experienced trauma sometimes develop ghost stories as a way of keeping important memories alive while processing grief and loss. The Headless Horseman could represent all the unnamed casualties of war, giving them a form of symbolic presence in cultural memory. The seasonal return of the legend in popular culture creates predictable opportunities for people to engage with these difficult themes. Halloween becomes a time when it is socially acceptable to think about death and fear in a controlled, ritualized way. Some therapists have used storytelling and narrative techniques to help clients work through traumatic experiences. The structure of legend and folklore provides familiar patterns that can make personal stories feel less overwhelming. You stand now in the misty Hudson Valley as dawn breaks through the autumn trees. The landscape itself seems to pulse with mystery and memory. There is something about this particular environment that nurtures ghost stories and keeps them alive across generations. The geography of the region contributes to its supernatural reputation. The rolling hills create pockets of mist and shadow that can easily be mistaken for mysterious figures. Ancient trees and old stone walls suggest the presence of long-vanished inhabitants. Water features prominently in the local folklore. The Hudson River and its tributaries create reflective surfaces that can produce optical illusions. The sound of flowing water provides a constant background murmur that can mask or mimic other sounds. The area's history of humor conducive to ghostly encounters. Autumn mists, winter storms, and spring fogs all contribute to an atmosphere where the ordinary world seems to blend with something more mysterious. The preservation of historic buildings and sites maintains visual connections to the past that keep old stories feeling relevant. When you can see the same church or bridge that Irving wrote about, the legend feels more immediate and plausible. You walk now through the commercial district of Sleepy Hollow, where businesses have embraced the community's supernatural heritage as a source of economic development. Ghost tours, haunted attractions, and Halloween festivals bring thousands of visitors to the area each year. Local restaurants offer themed menus during October, featuring dishes with names like Headless Horseman Stew and Ichabod's Last Meal. Gift shops sell souvenirs ranging from tasteful literary items to kitschy plastic decorations. Hotels and bed and breakfast establishments market themselves as potentially haunted locations, appealing to guests who hope for a supernatural encounter during their stay. Some properties have developed elaborate ghost stories about their own histories. The economic success of supernatural tourism has inspired other communities with similar folklore traditions to develop their own paranormal attractions. Ghost stories have become recognized as valuable cultural resources that can attract visitors and support local businesses. This commercialization has both positive and negative effects on the legend itself. On one hand, it ensures that the story remains alive and relevant to new generations. On the other hand, it can dilute the mysterious qualities that originally made the tale compelling. The challenge for communities like Sleepy Hollow is to balance economic development with preservation of the authentic historical and cultural elements that give legends their power. You look ahead now into the uncertain future, wondering how the Headless Horseman legend will continue to evolve. Technology and changing cultural attitudes will undoubtedly influence how future generations understand and interpret this classic story. Virtual and augmented reality technologies may create new ways for people to experience the legend. Immersive simulations could allow visitors to Sleepy Hollow to see historical recreations of Irving's era, or to encounter digital versions of the ghostly rider. Climate change and environmental degradation could alter the landscape that inspired the original story. Rising sea levels and changing weather patterns may transform for the meditative qualities of traditional storytelling. The Headless Horseman tale could find new life as a form of narrative therapy or mindful relaxation. Immigration and cultural diversity in the Hudson Valley region may introduce new, supernatural traditions that blend with or compete with the existing folklore. The Headless Horseman might become just one ghost among many in a richer, more complex supernatural landscape. You find yourself once again on that quiet country road where our journey began. The mist is thicker now, and shadows stretch longer across the pavement. Somewhere in the distance you hear the faint sound of hoofbeats, though no horse is visible. This is the true power of the Headless Horseman legend. It creates a framework for experiencing mystery and wonder in an increasingly demystified world. Even skeptics can feel the pull of the story when they find themselves alone on a dark road near Sleepy Hollow. The legend persists because it speaks to something fundamental in human nature: our need for mystery, our fascination with death, our desire to believe that there is more to existence than what we can measure and quantify. The Headless Horseman embodies all of these longings in a single, powerful image. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the story has shaped your understanding of this place and this season. You cannot walk through autumn mist without thinking of restless spirits. You cannot hear unexplained sounds in the night without wondering what might be approaching through the darkness. The Headless Horseman has become part of the landscape of the American imagination. He rides not just through the Hudson Valley, but through the collective unconscious of a culture that still needs its monsters and mysteries. His annual return reminds us that some stories are too powerful to die, too meaningful to forget. As you walk home through the gathering darkness, you carry the legend with you. It has become part of your own personal mythology, a story that helps you make sense of fear and wonder, and the thin places where the known world touches something larger and stranger. You realize now that you have become part of the legend yourself. By listening to this story, by walking through its landscapes and meeting its characters, you have joined the long chain of people who have kept this tale alive across the centuries. Every time someone tells the story of the Headless Horseman, they add something of themselves to it. Their own fears and hopes. Because people like you continue to listen, to wonder, to imagine. The legend lives in the space between belief and skepticism, in the twilight realm where stories become more real than facts. As you settle into sleep tonight, let the rhythm of hoofbeats carry you into dreams. Let the mist of Sleepy Hollow wrap around your thoughts like a comfortable blanket. Let the mystery of the Headless Rider remind you that the world still holds wonders that cannot be easily explained or explained away. The legend waits for you in the shadows of tomorrow's evening, ready to be discovered anew by each generation of listeners, ready to guide them, as it has guided you, through the dark and mysterious territories of the human heart. And somewhere in the Hudson Valley, when the moon is dark and the mist rises from the river, hoofbeats echo through the night. Whether they belong to a restless spirit or a living horse matters less than the fact that someone, somewhere, is listening. Someone is keeping the story alive. Sleep well, traveller. The Headless Horseman rides tonight, as he has ridden for 2 centuries, carrying the dreams and fears of all who dare to believe in mystery. His story is your story now, part of the endless cycle of tales that help us understand who we are and where we come from. The legend of Sleepy Hollow's Headless Rider has become immortal not because it is true, but because it contains truth. Truth about loss and memory, about the persistence of the past, about the human need for wonder in a world that often seems too small for miracles. You descend now into the deeper currents that flow beneath the surface of this legend. Like the Hudson River itself, the story of the Headless Horseman has hidden depths that few explorers have fully mapped. Tonight, we venture into these mysterious waters together. The mist grows thicker around you as we explore the questions that have no easy answers. Why do some places seem to attract ghost stories, while others remain stubbornly mundane? What invisible forces shape the landscapes of the supernatural? What secrets lie buried in the soil of Sleepy Hollow? You walk through the old Dutch cemetery where weathered headstones lean at impossible angles. The names carved into the stone tell stories of their own. Van der Berg, Van Tassel, Crane. These were real families who lived and died in this valley, who witnessed the transformation of wilderness into farmland, who heard the first whispered tales of the Headless Rider. Watered with tears and blood for centuries, it should not surprise us that strange flowers bloom here. You sit now around a fire with the Lenape people who first called this valley home. The year is 1600, long before European ships appeared on the Hudson River. The tribal elders speak in hushed tones of the spirits that dwell in this place. They tell you that certain locations serve as doorways between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. These thin places require careful respect and specific rituals to navigate safely. The valley where the Headless Horseman would one day ride was already known as a place where the boundaries between worlds grew soft. The Lenape understood something about the nature of spirit that the later European colonists would struggle to comprehend. They saw death not as an ending, but as a transformation, a passage from one state of being to another. The dead did not simply vanish, they continued to exist in a parallel reality that sometimes intersected with the world of the living. These indigenous beliefs about restless spirits and wandering souls provided the foundation for the legends that would emerge centuries later. When Dutch settlers began reporting strange encounters in the valley, they were unknowingly tapping into much older traditions of supernatural experience. The native people also understood the connection between landscape and spirit. Certain hills, certain streams, certain groves of trees possessed their own unique energies and personalities. The land itself was alive, conscious, capable of remembering and responding to human actions. This animistic worldview created a context where ghost stories made perfect sense. If the land could remember, then it could also preserve the imprint of traumatic events. Violent deaths would leave lasting scars on the spiritual landscape, creating the conditions for future hauntings. The European colonists brought their own supernatural traditions, but these merged with and were shaped by the indigenous understanding of place and spirit. The result was a uniquely American form of folklore that combined old-world ghost stories with new-world shamanic wisdom. You find yourself now in a sturdy stone farmhouse as Dutch colonists gather around the hearth on a winter evening in 1650. Outside, the wind howls through bare tree branches, and strange sounds echo across the frozen valley. The Dutch settlers were practical people, focused on building successful farms. Dutch also carried stories of soldiers who died in battle and could not find peace. The 80 Years' War had created countless such tales, of fallen warriors who continued to fight long after their bodies had turned to dust. These stories found new life in the American wilderness, but the New World presented challenges that European folklore had not anticipated. The vast forests, the strange wildlife, the unpredictable weather, all created an atmosphere of uncertainty and potential danger. Familiar spirits from the old country seemed inadequate to explain the mysteries of this new landscape. The Dutch colonists began to develop hybrid beliefs that combined their traditional supernatural lore with new experiences and observations. They noticed that certain animals behaved strangely in specific locations. They observed that some nights brought unexplained sounds and sights that defied rational explanation. These practical farmers and traders were not particularly superstitious by the standards of their time. They believed in ghosts and spirits because their direct experience seemed to confirm the reality of such phenomena. When multiple witnesses reported similar encounters, the stories gained credibility and began to spread throughout the community. The Dutch language itself contributed to the development of local folklore. Words and concepts that had no direct English equivalent created nuanced understandings of supernatural phenomena. The colonists distinguished between different types of spirits and hauntings in ways that would later be lost when English became the dominant language. You stand now on a battlefield where the morning mist rises from ground that has been soaked with blood. The year is 1777, and the Revolutionary War has come to the Hudson Valley with devastating effect. The clash between American patriots and British forces, supported by Hessian mercenaries, will leave lasting scars on this landscape. The Hessian soldiers who fought here were professionals, men who had made war their career and their art. They wore distinctive uniforms and carried weapons that marked them as foreign, as other. To the local colonists, these German mercenaries represented everything threatening about the outside world. Many of these soldiers were young men who had never expected to die in a foreign land, fighting for causes they barely understood. They had been recruited or conscripted from small German states and sent across the ocean to suppress a rebellion in which they had no personal stake. When these men fell in battle, they were buried hastily in unmarked graves or left for scavengers. Their families would never know what became of them.
Saw neighbours killed, homes burned, crops destroyed. They experienced the breakdown of normal social order and the emergence of violence as the primary means of resolving disputes. This collective trauma created ideal conditions for the development of ghost stories. When a community has been overwhelmed by violence and loss, the boundary between the living and the dead begins to feel less secure. The normal assumptions about mortality and permanence no longer provide adequate comfort. The image of the Headless Horseman can be understood as a symbolic representation of all the nameless soldiers who died in the valley. His lack of a head suggests the way war dehumanizes its victims, reducing individual human beings to interchangeable units in military calculations. His eternal riding represents the restlessness of those who died before their time, who were cut down before they could complete their life's work or return home to their loved ones. He becomes a symbol for all the unfinished business that violent death leaves behind. You walk now through the interior landscape of the human mind, exploring the psychological terrain where ghost stories take root and flourish. The Headless Horseman exists not just in the physical geography of Sleepy Hollow, but in the mental geography of human consciousness. Fear serves important evolutionary functions, alerting us to potential dangers and preparing our bodies for fight or flight responses. But in modern life, many of our deepest fears have no clear external targets. We worry about abstract threats like social rejection, financial insecurity, or existential meaninglessness. Ghost stories provide a way to externalize these abstract anxieties, giving them concrete form and specific location. The Headless Horseman becomes a vessel for carrying fears that would otherwise remain formless and unmanageable. By confronting the ghostly rider, we practice confronting our own mortality and vulnerability. The legend also speaks to deeper concerns about identity and consciousness. The image of a person without a head raises disturbing questions about what makes us who we are. If the head contains the mind, then what remains when it is gone? Is there something essential about human identity that persists beyond physical form? These philosophical questions have become more pressing in an age of advancing medical technology and artificial intelligence. As we develop machines that can simulate state, suggest that something essential about human nature persists beyond death. Consciousness may survive in altered form, maintaining some connection to the world of the living. The changing seasons create a perfect psychological context for ghost stories, and you feel now the deep rhythms of the natural world as autumn settles over the Hudson Valley once again. There is something in the human psyche that responds to seasonal changes, particularly the transition from the abundance of summer to the dormancy of winter. Fall represents a time of harvest and preparation, but also of decline and approaching death. The brilliant colours of autumn leaves remind us that beauty and mortality are intimately connected. Nature puts on its most spectacular display precisely at the moment when it begins to die. This seasonal symbolism creates a perfect psychological context for ghost stories. As the natural world appears to be dying around us, we become more aware of our own mortality. The approach of winter feels like a rehearsal for the approach of death. Halloween traditions deliberately amplify these seasonal associations, creating a culturally sanctioned time for exploring fears about death and the supernatural.
The Headless Horseman has become one of the central figures in this annual ritual of confronting mortality. But there is something comforting about the cyclical nature of these seasonal observances. Halloween comes every year, allowing us to practice dealing with fear and death in a controlled social context. The ghost stories that seem so frightening in October become familiar and almost reassuring through repetition. The Headless Horseman's annual return in popular culture mirrors the return of autumn itself. Like the changing leaves and the shorter days, his appearance marks the passage of time and the continuation of natural cycles. His presence becomes a sign that some things endure even as others fade away. This seasonal framework also helps explain why ghost stories often feel most compelling during certain times of year. The atmospheric conditions of autumn, the quality of light, the sounds and smells in the air all contribute to a heightened awareness of mystery and possibility. Modern life often disconnects us from these natural rhythms, but ghost stories help restore our sense of connection to the deeper patterns of existence. They remind us that we are part of something larger than our individual lives, something that includes both the living and the dead. You observe now how the Headless Horseman began to circulate, though these were usually revealed to be hoaxes or misidentified natural phenomena. The development of motion pictures created even more dramatic possibilities for bringing the legend to life. Early filmmakers were fascinated by the cinematic potential of ghost stories, and the Headless Horseman proved to be a popular subject for silent films and early talkies. Radio broadcasts in the 1930s and 1940s used sound effects and atmospheric music to create immersive, supernatural experiences. Listeners could close their eyes and imagine themselves riding through Sleepy Hollow alongside the ghostly horseman. The medium's reliance on audio rather than visual elements made it particularly effective for ghost stories. Television brought the legend into people's homes, making it a shared cultural experience that families could enjoy together. Animated versions introduced the story to children, while more serious adaptations explored its psychological and literary dimensions for adult audiences. The internet age has democratized ghost stories, allowing anyone to share their own encounters or interpretations. Social media platforms buzz with alleged sightings and paranormal investigations. Video sharing sites feature countless amateur attempts to capture evidence of supernatural activity. Virtual and augmented reality technologies promise to create even more immersive supernatural experiences. Future visitors to Sleepy Hollow may be able to see historical recreations of Irving's era or encounter digital versions of the Headless Horseman that respond to their presence. Each technological advancement has changed how people experience and understand the legend, but the core elements remain remarkably consistent. The ghostly rider continues to fascinate audiences, regardless of the medium through which they encounter him. You enter now a modern laboratory, where researchers study the phenomenon of ghost sightings, using the tools and methods of empirical science. How do scientists approach legends like the Headless Horseman? What can objective investigation reveal about subjective, supernatural experiences? Psychologists have identified numerous factors that can contribute to ghost sightings. Sleep deprivation, stress, and certain medical conditions can all produce hallucinations that feel completely real to the person experiencing them. Environmental factors like electromagnetic fields and infrasound can also create sensations that people interpret as supernatural. The power of suggestion plays a significant role in conditions. Pareidolia, the tendency to see familiar patterns in random stimuli, can transform natural phenomena into ghostly appearances. A combination of mist, moonlight, and moving tree branches might create the perfect illusion of a headless rider. Audio hallucinations are also surprisingly common, particularly in quiet environments where the brain may amplify subtle sounds or create phantom noises to fill the silence. The rhythmic sound of one's own heartbeat can be misperceived as approaching footsteps or hoofbeats. But scientific explanations for individual ghost sightings do not necessarily invalidate the cultural and psychological importance of ghost stories. Even if every alleged encounter with the Headless Horseman can be explained through natural causes, the legend itself serves important functions that science cannot fully address. The scientific worldview provides valuable tools for understanding how and why people report supernatural experiences, but it cannot easily accommodate the symbolic and emotional meanings that ghost stories carry. These narratives operate in realms of human experience that resist purely empirical analysis. Sit now with cultural anthropologists as they discuss the Headless Horseman legend as an example of how human societies create and maintain supernatural beliefs. From this perspective, the truth or falsehood of ghost stories matters less than their social and cultural functions. Anthropologists observe that virtually all human cultures have developed beliefs about spirits, ghosts, and supernatural entities. This universality suggests that such beliefs serve important purposes that transcend individual psychology or specific historical circumstances. Ghost stories often function as repositories of cultural memory, preserving important information about past events in narrative form. The Headless Horseman legend encodes memories of the Revolutionary War and its aftermath, keeping alive awareness of historical trauma that might otherwise be forgotten. These stories also serve as teaching tools, transmitting cultural values and social norms through memorable narratives. The legend of Sleepy Hollow teaches lessons about the consequences of greed, the importance of community solidarity, and the proper relationship between rationality and intuition. Supernatural beliefs can provide mechanisms for social control, encouraging conformity to community standards through fear of supernatural punishment. In some versions of the Headless Horseman story, the ghost specifically targets those who violate social norms or moral principles. Legend, despite centuries of scientific advancement, demonstrates the enduring human need for meaning-making narratives that address existential concerns about death, identity, and moral purpose. You find yourself now in a university literature classroom, where scholars analyze Irving's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow as a masterpiece of early American fiction. The story's enduring appeal can be understood partly through careful examination of its literary techniques and thematic complexity. Irving's use of narrative framing creates multiple layers of storytelling that allow readers to maintain skeptical distance while still enjoying the supernatural elements. The story is presented as a tale told by a Dutch historian to Geoffrey Crayon, who then relates it to the reader. This nested structure suggests that the truth of the story becomes less important than its entertainment value. The character of Ichabod Crane serves as a complex figure who embodies both sympathy and satire. His education and refinement mark him as superior to the local farmers, but his superstition and greed reveal character flaws that make him a less than heroic protagonist. Irving creates a character who is neither purely sympathetic nor entirely unsympathetic. The story's treatment of social class reflects the tensions of early American society. Ichabod represents the educated outsider trying to gain acceptance in an established community. His failure to win Katrina Van Tassel can be read as commentary on the barriers that prevent social mobility in supposedly egalitarian American society. Irving's descriptions of the Hudson Valley landscape create a specifically American Gothic atmosphere that differs from European models. The natural environment becomes a character in its own right, shaping events through its mysterious influence on human behavior and perception. The story's ambiguous ending has generated centuries of critical debate. Did the Headless Horseman actually appear, or was it Brom Bones playing an elaborate prank? Irving deliberately refuses to provide a definitive answer, leaving readers to interpret the evidence according to their own inclinations. This ambiguity reflects broader themes about the nature of truth and the relationship between empirical evidence and subjective experience. The story suggests that some questions may be more interesting than their answers, that mystery itself has value, independent of resolution. You contemplate now the deeper philosophical questions raised by the Headless Horseman legend. What does this story reveal about the nature of identity, consciousness, and personal survival after death? How can survive physical destruction, or that identity consists of more than purely mental phenomena? Different philosophical traditions offer varying interpretations of this puzzle. Dualist theories propose that mind and body are separate substances, making it conceivable that consciousness could persist without its physical container. Materialist philosophies would tend to view the Headless Horseman as either impossible or purely symbolic. Religious and spiritual frameworks provide their own approaches to understanding survival after death. The Christian concept of the soul offers one explanation for how identity might persist beyond bodily death. Eastern traditions like Buddhism and Hinduism propose more complex models of consciousness that can accommodate various forms of posthumous existence. The Headless Horseman also embodies anxieties about personal identity and continuity of self. What makes you you? If your memories were transferred to another body, would that person be you or someone else with your memories? If your personality changed dramatically, would you still be the same person? These questions have become more pressing as medical and technological advances make previously theoretical scenarios increasingly plausible. Brain transplants, memory modification, and artificial intelligence all challenge traditional assumptions about the boundaries of personal identity. The ghost story provides a narrative framework for exploring these complex philosophical issues without requiring formal academic training in philosophy. Through imaginative engagement with supernatural narratives, ordinary people can grapple with some of the deepest questions about human existence. You enter now a small country church, where the faithful gather to contemplate the spiritual significance of ghost stories and supernatural encounters. How do different religious traditions understand phenomena like the Headless Horseman? What do ghost stories reveal about human spiritual longings and concerns? Traditional Christian theology has always struggled with ghost stories, which seem to conflict with official doctrines about death and afterlife. If souls go immediately to heaven or hell after death, then how can they continue to haunt earthly locations? Various explanations have been proposed, from purgatorial states to demonic deceptions. Some Christian interpretations of the Headless Horseman legend view the ghost as a lost soul in need of prayers and proper burial. This understanding emphasizes the continuing connection between the living and the dead, suggesting that the survivors have responsibilities toward those who have passed on. More fluid boundaries between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. From these perspectives, ghostly encounters represent natural interactions between different levels of existence, rather than violations of spiritual law. New Age and contemporary spiritual movements have embraced ghost stories as evidence for the survival of consciousness after death. The Headless Horseman becomes proof that identity persists beyond physical form, supporting beliefs about reincarnation and spiritual evolution. Secular humanist approaches to ghost stories focus on their psychological and cultural functions, rather than their potential supernatural reality. From this perspective, the Headless Horseman represents human needs and fears, rather than actual spiritual phenomena. These diverse religious and spiritual interpretations demonstrate the flexibility of ghost stories as vehicles for expressing and exploring fundamental questions about death, meaning, and transcendence. You visit now a therapist's office where mental health professionals explore how ghost stories like the Headless Horseman legend can be used in therapeutic contexts. Can supernatural narratives actually help people heal from trauma and loss? How might fictional ghosts assist in processing real grief? Narrative therapy recognizes that the stories we tell about our lives shape our understanding of ourselves and our possibilities for change. Ghost stories provide powerful metaphors for exploring themes of unfinished business, unresolved grief, and the persistence of memory after loss. The Headless Horseman represents the part of the self that feels damaged or incomplete after traumatic experiences. Working with this image therapeutically might help clients explore feelings of fragmentation and disconnection that often follow severe trauma. For individuals dealing with the loss of loved ones, ghost stories can provide frameworks for understanding continuing bonds with the deceased. The idea that the dead might persist in some form can offer comfort to those struggling with the finality of death. Veterans and their families might find particular resonance in the Headless Horseman story, which deals directly with the psychological aftermath of warfare. The ghostly soldier becomes a symbol for all the ways that war experiences continue to haunt survivors long after the fighting has ended. Group therapy sessions sometimes use storytelling exercises to help participants process shared traumas or explore common themes. Ghost stories provide safe containers for discussing difficult emotions and experiences that might be too overwhelming to address directly. Art therapy and expressive therapies can incorporate in their ability to provide symbolic language for experiences that resist ordinary description. They offer metaphors that make the unmappable territory of human suffering more navigable. You observe now how sociologists study the Headless Horseman legend as a window into the social forces and cultural dynamics that shape community life. How do ghost stories reflect and influence social relationships? What can supernatural folklore reveal about power structures and social tensions? The persistence of the Headless Horseman legend in Sleepy Hollow demonstrates how communities can use supernatural narratives to maintain distinctive local identities in an increasingly homogenized world. The ghost story becomes a form of cultural capital that sets this particular place apart from other suburban communities. Tourism based on supernatural attractions creates complex dynamics between local residents and outside visitors. Some community members embrace the economic benefits of ghost tourism, while others worry about the commercialization of local traditions and the disruption of daily life. The legend also reflects broader American anxieties about immigration and cultural assimilation. The Hessian soldier represents the foreign other, the outsider who threatens established social order. His ghostly persistence suggests fears about the long-term consequences of cultural mixing. Class tensions appear throughout different versions of the story. Irving's original tale can be read as commentary on the conflict between educated outsiders and established local elites. More recent adaptations have explored themes of economic inequality and social mobility. Gender dynamics also play important roles in Headless Horseman narratives. Traditional versions often feature the ghost pursuing or threatening women, reflecting broader cultural anxieties about female vulnerability and male violence. The seasonal revival of interest in the legend during Halloween reveals how consumer capitalism has transformed traditional folklore into commercial entertainment. Ghost stories become products to be packaged and sold, rather than living community traditions. These sociological analyses help us understand how supernatural folklore functions as more than mere entertainment. Ghost stories carry and transmit complex social information about community values, power relationships, and cultural boundaries. You travel now beyond the Hudson Valley to explore how different cultures have created their own versions of Headless Rider legends. The motif of the decapitated horseman appears in folklore traditions around the world. German folklore, the cultural background of the Hessian soldiers, includes its own Headless Rider traditions. The wild hunt, led by spectral horsemen, was said to ride through German forests on stormy nights, collecting the souls of the dead. Mexican Day of the Dead celebrations feature their own headless figures, though these are generally more benevolent than their northern counterparts. The emphasis on maintaining relationships with deceased family members creates a different context for understanding supernatural persistence. Japanese folklore includes similar figures in the form of headless spirits called nukakubi, though these are typically depicted as floating heads rather than headless bodies. The cultural specifics differ, but the underlying anxieties about identity and consciousness remain recognizable. African and African American folklore traditions have contributed their own supernatural horsemen to American ghost story traditions. These figures often carry different cultural meanings related to ancestral spirits and community protection, rather than eternal punishment. Native American traditions from various tribes include stories of spirit riders and supernatural horsemen, though horses were not native to North America before European contact. These stories often emphasize the connection between spiritual beings and the natural world. The global distribution of headless rider stories suggests that this particular image taps into psychological and spiritual concerns that transcend specific cultural boundaries. The fear of losing one's head, literally or metaphorically, appears to be a cross-cultural human anxiety. You kneel now in the dirt alongside archaeologists who study the physical remains of the Revolutionary War period in the Hudson Valley. What can material evidence reveal about the historical foundations of the Headless Horseman legend? Do the artifacts tell stories that complement or contradict the supernatural narratives? Excavations in the area have uncovered numerous artifacts from the Revolutionary War period, including buttons, buckles, and weapons that belong to both American and Hessian soldiers. These physical remains provide tangible connections to the historical events that inspired Irving's story. Several unmarked graves from the Revolutionary War period have been discovered in the region, lending some credibility to stories about hastily buried soldiers. The lack of proper identification on these graves creates space for legends about restless spirits to develop and flourish. Archaeological evidence suggests that the area saw significant military activity during the war, with multiple skirmishes and encampments leaving traces in cannon fire or sword strikes. While no definitively headless remains have been identified, the physical evidence confirms the reality of violent death in the area. Historical archaeologists have also studied the material culture of Dutch colonial settlements in the region, uncovering evidence of daily life that helps us understand the social context in which ghost stories developed. The artifacts reveal a community struggling to maintain European traditions while adapting to New World conditions. Native American archaeological sites in the area predate European settlement by thousands of years, supporting indigenous claims about the spiritual significance of this particular landscape. The long history of human occupation may contribute to the area's reputation for supernatural activity. The archaeological record provides important context for understanding the Headless Horseman legend, even though it cannot prove or disprove the existence of supernatural phenomena. Material evidence helps ground the fantastic elements of the story in historical reality. You walk now through the natural landscape of the Hudson Valley, paying attention to the environmental conditions that might contribute to supernatural experiences. How do geography, climate, and ecology influence the development and persistence of ghost stories? The topography of the region creates numerous pockets of mist and fog, particularly during autumn months when temperature differences between air and water create ideal conditions for atmospheric phenomena. These natural occurrences can easily be mistaken for ghostly apparitions, especially in low-light conditions. The Hudson River itself generates its own microclimate, with moisture from the water creating persistent humidity that can distort sound and vision. The river also produces various sounds, from gentle lapping to rushing current, that might be misinterpreted as supernatural activity. Dense forests in the area create acoustic conditions that can amplify and distort sounds in unexpected ways. The echo effects produced by hills and trees can make distant noises seem much closer, or create phantom sounds that have no identifiable source. Local wildlife contributes to the mysterious atmosphere of the region. Owls, bats, and other nocturnal creatures create sounds and movements that can startle nighttime travelers. Large birds like herons can create imposing silhouettes that might be mistaken for supernatural figures. Seasonal changes in vegetation affect visibility and create different atmospheric conditions throughout the year. Autumn leaf fall creates rustling sounds that can be misinterpreted as approaching footsteps, while bare winter hallucinations or altered states of consciousness. The interplay between these natural environmental factors and human psychology creates ideal conditions for supernatural experiences. The landscape itself becomes an active participant in the creation and maintenance of ghost stories. You join now a team of contemporary paranormal investigators as they use modern technology to explore the supernatural claims associated with Sleepy Hollow. What can electromagnetic field detectors, thermal cameras, and digital audio recorders reveal about the Headless Horseman legend? Paranormal investigation has evolved significantly from the simple ghost hunting of previous generations. Modern investigators use sophisticated equipment borrowed from scientific research to document alleged supernatural phenomena. They approach their work with methods that attempt to bridge the gap between subjective experience and objective measurement. Electronic voice phenomena, or EVP, recordings have captured what some investigators claim are voices of deceased individuals. In Sleepy Hollow, researchers have recorded audio anomalies that they interpret as evidence of supernatural presence, though skeptics argue these sounds can be explained through natural causes or recording artifacts. Thermal imaging cameras can detect temperature variations that are invisible to the naked eye. Some investigators claim to have captured thermal images of humanoid figures in locations associated with the Headless Horseman legend, though these images are often ambiguous and open to multiple interpretations. Electromagnetic field detectors register fluctuations in local electromagnetic radiation. Paranormal investigators often interpret sudden spikes in electromagnetic activity as evidence of spiritual presence, though conventional science would attribute such readings to electronic interference or natural electromagnetic phenomena. Motion detectors and infrared cameras have been set up in areas where the Headless Horseman has allegedly been sighted. While these devices occasionally register unexplained movements, critics point out that wildlife, wind, or equipment malfunction could account for most such incidents. Digital photography has produced numerous images that paranormal investigators claim show evidence of supernatural activity. However, the ease with which digital images can be manipulated has made photographic evidence less compelling than it once was. The psychological aspects of paranormal investigation are as interesting as the technical ones. The act of searching for evidence of supernatural phenomena can create heightened elements. In the 19th century, the legend reflected anxieties about rapid social and economic change. As industrialization transformed American society, ghost stories provided a way to process feelings of displacement and loss of traditional values. The Headless Horseman represented the violence and disruption of an earlier era that continued to haunt the present. The early 20th century saw the legend adapted for new forms of mass media, from radio dramas to silent films. These adaptations often emphasized the entertainment value of the story, while downplaying its more serious themes about war, death, and cultural conflict. The mid-20th century brought psychological interpretations that viewed the Headless Horseman as a symbol of repressed trauma and unconscious fears. Freudian and Jungian analysts found rich material in the imagery of decapitation and ghostly pursuit. The late 20th century witnessed increasing commercialization of the legend as Halloween became a major consumer holiday. The Headless Horseman became a marketable icon, appearing on everything from greeting cards to theme park attractions. The early 21st century has seen the legend adapted for digital media, from video games to virtual reality experiences. These new formats allow for interactive engagement with the story, giving audiences agency in determining how their encounters with the ghostly rider unfold. Contemporary adaptations often emphasize environmental and social justice themes, interpreting the Headless Horseman as a victim of colonial violence or military-industrial exploitation. These readings reflect current concerns about historical trauma and institutional accountability. The legend's ability to accommodate such diverse interpretations demonstrates its deep resonance with fundamental human concerns that transcend specific historical periods or cultural contexts. You enter now a healing sanctuary, where therapists and spiritual counselors work with individuals who have experienced their own encounters with loss, trauma, and the mysterious workings of grief. How might the Headless Horseman legend serve as a tool for psychological and spiritual healing? Many people struggling with the loss of loved ones find comfort in the idea that death might not be final, that consciousness might persist in some form beyond physical existence. The Headless Horseman, despite his frightening appearance, represents the possibility of posthumous survival, offering hope to those who fear the complete extinction of consciousness. For individuals dealing with traumatic injuries or disabilities, the image of a headless figure framework for understanding how traumatic experiences can persist long after the original events, creating ongoing struggles that may seem supernatural in their persistence and power. The legend also offers models for confronting fear and uncertainty. In many versions of the story, characters must find courage to face the supernatural threat, suggesting that direct engagement with frightening experiences can lead to resolution and growth. Group therapy sessions sometimes use storytelling exercises based on ghost narratives to help participants explore their own experiences with loss and trauma. The fictional framework provides psychological safety that allows people to approach difficult emotions without becoming overwhelmed. The seasonal return of the Headless Horseman in popular culture creates predictable opportunities for communities to come together and process collective fears about death and uncertainty. These shared rituals can provide social support for individuals dealing with personal losses. The key to using ghost stories therapeutically lies in recognizing them as symbolic language rather than literal truth. The Headless Horseman becomes a metaphor that helps people articulate and work through experiences that resist direct expression. You find yourself now in a quiet place where the boundary between day and night between knowing and unknowing, grow soft and permeable. The Headless Horseman legend persists because it addresses questions that have no easy answers, mysteries that deepen rather than resolve with contemplation. What happens to consciousness when the brain is destroyed? Can identity survive the dissolution of the physical form that houses it? These questions have puzzled philosophers and theologians for millennia, and ghost stories like the Headless Horseman legend represent popular attempts to grapple with these eternal mysteries. The image of a headless figure who continues to ride suggests that something essential about human nature transcends physical limitations. Whether this something is called soul, consciousness, or spirit, the legend affirms its reality and persistence beyond bodily death. But the Headless Horseman is not a comforting ghost. His violent end and restless wandering suggest that death might not bring peace or resolution. The legend raises disturbing possibilities about posthumous existence that challenge comforting religious and philosophical assumptions. Why do some souls find rest while others become trapped in endless repetition of traumatic experiences? What determines whether death brings liberation or eternal imprisonment? The Headless Horseman embodies these troubling uncertainties about the nature of afterlife. The legend also explores different answers to these moral questions. These eternal questions ensure that the Headless Horseman legend will continue to fascinate and disturb new generations of listeners. As long as humans face mortality and wonder about its meaning, stories like this one will find receptive audiences. You stand now at the end of our long journey through the landscapes of legend and mystery. The mist has grown so thick that you can barely see the road ahead, but somehow you know the way. The Headless Horseman has been your invisible companion throughout this exploration, riding alongside as you discovered the many layers of meaning embedded in his story. As our tale draws to its close, you realize that you have become part of the legend yourself. Every person who encounters this story, who allows it to live in their imagination, becomes a carrier of the tradition. The Headless Horseman rides not just through the Hudson Valley, but through the collective consciousness of all who have heard his tale. The legend persists because it serves needs that transcend entertainment or historical curiosity. It provides a framework for understanding experiences that resist rational explanation. It offers metaphors for processing trauma and loss. It creates opportunities for communities to explore shared fears and hopes about mortality and meaning. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, you cannot deny the power of this particular story to capture and hold human attention across centuries and cultures. The Headless Horseman has achieved a form of immortality that most historical figures would envy, living on in the memories and imaginations of countless people who have never visited Sleepy Hollow. The seasonal return of interest in the legend demonstrates its deep connection to natural cycles and human psychological rhythms. Like the autumn leaves that fall and are reborn each year, the Headless Horseman dies and returns, reminding us that some patterns persist despite individual mortality. In a world increasingly dominated by scientific rationalism and technological progress, the Headless Horseman represents a stubborn refusal to accept purely materialist explanations for human experience. The legend insists that mystery and wonder remain essential elements of meaningful existence. As you prepare to leave this misty realm and return to ordinary consciousness, you carry with you something that cannot be measured or quantified. The Headless Horseman has shared his gift of mystery, his reminder that the world contains more than what can be seen or understood through who dare to believe that consciousness can survive the destruction of its physical vessel. His story is your story now, part of the endless circulation of narratives that help us understand who we are and where we might be going. In the morning, you may question what you have experienced here tonight. But when autumn returns and mist rises from the river, when shadows grow long and strange sounds echo through the darkness, you will remember. You will listen for hoofbeats and wonder what rides unseen through the night. The legend of Sleepy Hollow's headless rider will outlive us all, passed down through generations yet to come, adapted to technologies and cultural contexts we cannot yet imagine. But its essential message will remain unchanged, that mystery and meaning persist beyond the reach of rational explanation, that death is not the final word in the human story. And so the Headless Horseman rides on, eternal and enigmatic, carrying within his story all the questions that make us most deeply human. His legend continues because we continue, because each new generation must discover for itself the truth that stories sometimes carry more reality than facts. The mist clears now, and dawn approaches. But somewhere in the shadows between day and night, between memory and forgetting, the Headless Horseman continues his endless ride through the landscapes of human imagination, where all the most important truths make their home. You walk now through the archives of memory, where countless variations of the Headless Horseman story are preserved like pressed flowers between the pages of time. Each telling has added its own fragrance to the legend, its own subtle colouring to the eternal narrative that refuses to fade. In the earliest Dutch settlements, you hear the whispered conversations of women gathered around their spinning wheels. They speak in hushed tones of the strange rider who appears when the moon is dark. Their words carry the cadence of old ballads, stories that were sung rather than simply told. The rhythm of their speech matches the steady motion of their wheels, creating a hypnotic backdrop for tales of supernatural encounter. These women understand something about the power of repetition, about how stories become embedded in the very fabric of daily life through constant retelling. They know that legends are not preserved in books, but in the living memory of communities, passed down through generations of mothers and daughters who gather in kitchens and parlours to share the mysteries of their world.
Story's vitality, proof that it continues to grow and change with each telling. The Headless Horseman lives not in any single version, but in the space between all possible versions, in the realm of imagination where anything might be true. You find yourself in a frontier tavern where fur trappers and river pilots share tales from their travels. The year is 1840, and the American West is opening up to exploration and settlement. These rough men have seen wonders and terrors that defy easy description, and they listen with respectful attention to stories of supernatural encounters. One grizzled trapper claims to have seen a headless rider along the Missouri River, far from the Hudson Valley where the legend originated. He describes a figure mounted on a spectral horse, riding along the riverbank in the pale light of dawn. The details differ from Irving's story, but the essential elements remain recognizable. This geographical expansion of the legend demonstrates something important about how folklore spreads and adapts. Stories do not simply travel from place to place unchanged. They take root in new environments, drawing nourishment from local conditions and concerns. The Headless Horseman of the Missouri frontier carries different meanings than his counterpart in Sleepy Hollow, but both serve similar psychological and cultural functions. You observe how the story changes as it moves westward with the expanding frontier. In farming communities, the headless rider becomes associated with agricultural cycles, appearing during harvest time or when crops fail mysteriously. In mining towns, he is said to guard hidden treasures or to appear as an omen of disaster in the mines. Each adaptation reflects the specific anxieties and hopes of the communities that embrace the legend. The Headless Horseman becomes a flexible symbol that can accommodate a wide range of meanings while maintaining its essential character as a figure of mystery and supernatural power. You sit now in a Victorian parlour where spiritualism is at the height of its popularity. The year is 1875, and educated Americans are fascinated by the possibility of communicating with the dead through mediums and seances. The Headless Horseman legend takes on new significance in this context, becoming evidence for the survival of consciousness after death. Spiritualist publications feature accounts of encounters with the ghostly rider, often accompanied by elaborate theories about the nature of the afterlife and the conditions that allow spirits resolution before the spirit can find peace. Skeptics point out the inconsistencies in these spiritual communications, arguing that they prove the fraudulent nature of mediumship. But believers interpret the variations as evidence of the complexity of spiritual communication, suggesting that messages from the beyond are often distorted by the limitations of human mediums. The spiritualist movement's embrace of the Headless Horseman legend demonstrates how supernatural narratives can be reinterpreted to serve new cultural needs. The same story that once served as entertainment and moral instruction becomes scientific evidence for the survival of consciousness after death. You walk through the bustling streets of New York City in the 1920s, where jazz music and modernist art are transforming American culture.
The Headless Horseman legend might seem out of place in this urban environment, but it finds new expressions that reflect the anxieties of the modern age. In speakeasies and nightclubs, musicians compose jazz arrangements inspired by Irving's story. The syncopated rhythms and dissonant harmonies capture something essential about the legend's atmosphere of unease and supernatural tension. The Headless Horseman becomes a figure of urban folklore, riding through the city's dreams and nightmares. Surrealist artists discover rich material in the imagery of decapitation and ghostly pursuit. Paintings and sculptures explore the psychological dimensions of the legend, using techniques of distortion and fragmentation to convey the disorienting experience of supernatural encounter. The emerging field of psychoanalysis finds the Headless Horseman particularly fascinating as a symbol of repressed trauma and unconscious fears. Freudian analysts interpret the missing head as representing castration anxiety, while Jungian theorists see the ghostly rider as an archetypal figure that appears in dreams and fantasies across cultures. These modern reinterpretations of the legend reflect broader cultural shifts towards psychological and symbolic understanding of human experience. The Headless Horseman becomes less a literal ghost and more a metaphor for the hidden forces that shape human behavior and perception. You observe how the Great Depression of the 1930s influences new tellings of the Headless Horseman story. In a time of economic hardship and social upheaval, the legend takes on themes of loss and displacement that resonate with contemporary struggles. Radio programs feature adaptations that emphasize the rider's role as a symbol of economic anxiety and social instability. The ghostly figure, victims of war and capitalism, riding eternally through a landscape scarred by human greed and violence. These Depression-era adaptations demonstrate the legend's continued relevance to contemporary concerns. The Headless Horseman serves as a flexible metaphor that can accommodate new anxieties while maintaining its essential character as a figure of mystery and supernatural power. You find yourself in a 1950s suburban community, where families gather around television sets to watch the latest adaptation of Irving's story. The post-war era brings new prosperity and stability, but also new fears about nuclear weapons and communist infiltration. Television producers create versions of the Headless Horseman legend that reflect Cold War anxieties about foreign threats and domestic security. The Hessian soldier becomes a symbol of the enemy within, the foreign agent who threatens American values and way of life. Children's television programs present sanitized versions of the story that emphasize mystery and adventure rather than genuine horror. The Headless Horseman becomes a somewhat comical figure, more likely to cause mischief than real harm. These adaptations reflect the era's desire to protect childhood innocence while still providing thrilling entertainment. Educational television uses the legend to teach lessons about American history and literature. Documentary programs explore the historical background of the Revolutionary War and the literary techniques that Irving used to create his masterpiece. The Headless Horseman becomes a vehicle for cultural education and patriotic instruction. These mid-century adaptations show how the legend continues to evolve in response to changing social conditions and cultural values. The core elements remain constant, but their interpretation and emphasis shift to reflect contemporary concerns and sensibilities. You walk through the counterculture movements of the 1960s, where young Americans are questioning traditional values and exploring alternative forms of spirituality and consciousness. The Headless Horseman legend finds new expressions that reflect these cultural upheavals. Psychedelic rock musicians create elaborate concept albums inspired by Irving's story, using electronic effects and unconventional instruments to create soundscapes that evoke supernatural encounter and altered states of consciousness. The Headless Rider becomes a figure of psychedelic exploration, representing the dissolution of ego boundaries and the exploration of mystical experience. Underground comic books feature avant-garde interpretations of the karmic resolution. Channelers claim to receive messages from the Hessian soldier's spirit, offering insights about past life experiences and spiritual evolution. These countercultural adaptations reflect broader questioning of authority and conventional wisdom that characterized the era. The Headless Horseman becomes a symbol of rebellion against established order and a guide for spiritual seekers exploring alternative realities.
You observe how the environmental movement of the 1970s influences new interpretations of the Headless Horseman legend. As Americans become increasingly aware of ecological destruction and climate change, the ghostly rider takes on new meanings related to humanity's relationship with the natural world. Environmental activists use the image of the Headless Horseman to symbolize the consequences of industrial pollution and habitat destruction. The ghostly figure becomes a representation of all the species that have been driven to extinction, all the landscapes that have been destroyed by human activity. Science fiction writers explore scenarios where the Headless Horseman appears as a warning about environmental catastrophe, riding through landscapes devastated by nuclear accident or chemical contamination. The legend becomes a vehicle for exploring themes of ecological responsibility and sustainable development. Documentary filmmakers create works that use the Hudson Valley setting of the original story to examine contemporary environmental challenges. The Headless Horseman becomes a symbol of the region's environmental history, representing both the beauty that has been preserved and the damage that has been done. These environmental interpretations demonstrate the legend's continued ability to adapt to new concerns and serve as a vehicle for social commentary. The Headless Horseman becomes a guardian spirit of the natural world, reminding humans of their responsibilities to future generations. You find yourself in the digital revolution of the 1980s and 1990s, where personal computers and video games are creating new forms of interactive entertainment. The Headless Horseman legend finds expression in these emerging media, reaching audiences in entirely new ways. Early computer games feature simple, text-based adventures where players must navigate encounters with the ghostly rider. These primitive programs rely on imagination rather than graphics, creating immersive experiences through descriptive text and player choice. As computer graphics improve, more sophisticated games allow players to explore detailed representations of Irving's fictional landscape, encountering the ghostly rider in ways that feel immediate and visceral. These technological adaptations represent a fundamental shift in how audiences engage with the legend. Instead of passively receiving the story through books, radio, or television, players become active participants in the narrative, making choices that influence the outcome of their supernatural encounters. You walk through the cultural landscape of the late 20th century, where postmodern artists and writers are deconstructing traditional narratives and challenging assumptions about truth and reality. The Headless Horseman legend becomes a subject for experimental exploration and critical analysis. Postmodern novelists create meta-fictional works that examine the process of storytelling itself, using the Headless Horseman as a symbol of how narratives shape perception and memory. These experimental texts challenge readers to question the boundaries between fiction and reality, between individual experience and cultural construct. Performance artists stage elaborate productions that blur the lines between theatre, visual art, and ritual practice. Audiences become participants in immersive experiences that explore the psychological and spiritual dimensions of the Headless Horseman legend through movement, sound, and sensory manipulation. Academic critics apply various theoretical frameworks to analyze the legend's cultural significance and ideological implications. Feminist scholars examine the gender dynamics in Irving's story, while post-colonial theorists explore how the legend reflects attitudes toward foreign cultures and colonial violence. These postmodern approaches to the Headless Horseman legend reflect broader cultural questioning of established authorities and universal truths. The story becomes a text to be deconstructed, rather than simply enjoyed, revealing hidden assumptions and cultural biases embedded in seemingly innocent folklore. You observe how the rise of the internet in the early 21st century creates entirely new communities of people interested in paranormal phenomena and supernatural encounters. Online forums dedicated to ghost hunting and supernatural investigation become gathering places for those who claim to have encountered the Headless Horseman. Digital photography and video recording equipment make it easier than ever for amateur investigators to document alleged supernatural activity. Websites feature countless images and videos purporting to show evidence of the ghostly rider. Though the quality is often poor
and the authenticity questionable. Featuring the Headless Horseman, from documentary series that investigate the historical background of the legend, to fictional adaptations that reimagine the story for contemporary audiences. The democratization of media production allows for more diverse voices and perspectives to contribute to the ongoing evolution of the legend. These digital age developments demonstrate how new technologies continue to shape the ways people engage with supernatural narratives. The Headless Horseman finds new life in virtual communities and digital media, reaching global audiences and inspiring new forms of creative expression. You walk through the post-9/11 cultural landscape, where Americans are grappling with new forms of trauma and vulnerability. The Headless Horseman legend takes on fresh significance in this context, serving as a metaphor for the persistence of violence and the difficulty of finding closure after traumatic events. Artists and writers create works that use the imagery of the Headless Rider to explore themes of national trauma and collective memory. The ghostly figure becomes a symbol of all the victims of violence whose stories remain untold, whose voices have been silenced by war and terrorism. Therapeutic communities begin using the Headless Horseman legend as a tool for helping trauma survivors process their experiences and find meaning in their suffering. The story provides a framework for understanding how traumatic events can continue to haunt individuals and communities long after the original incidents have passed. Academic conferences feature presentations on the legend's relevance to contemporary discussions of trauma, memory, and healing. Scholars from multiple disciplines explore how supernatural narratives can serve therapeutic functions and help communities process collective experiences of loss and violence. These post-9/11 interpretations demonstrate the legend's continued relevance to contemporary concerns about security, violence, and healing. The Headless Horseman becomes a figure that helps Americans understand their own experiences of trauma and vulnerability in an uncertain world. You find yourself in the era of climate change awareness, where environmental concerns have become central to global political and cultural discourse. The Headless Horseman legend is reinterpreted through this ecological lens, becoming a symbol of humanity's destructive relationship with the natural world. Environmental artists create installations that use the imagery of the ghostly rider to comment on species extinction and habitat destruction. The Headless Horseman becomes a Headless Rider becomes a symbol of environmental debt and intergenerational responsibility. Documentary filmmakers create works that explore the environmental history of the Hudson Valley, using the Headless Horseman legend as a narrative framework for examining how human activity has shaped the region's ecology over time. The ghostly figure becomes a witness to centuries of environmental change and degradation. These environmental interpretations reflect growing awareness of ecological crisis and the need for sustainable development. The Headless Horseman becomes a guardian spirit of the natural world, reminding humans of their responsibilities to the earth and future generations. You observe how the digital revolution has created new forms of artificial intelligence and virtual reality that are beginning to reshape human understanding of consciousness and identity. The Headless Horseman legend takes on new significance in this context, serving as a metaphor for questions about the nature of mind and self in an age of artificial intelligence. Computer scientists working on artificial intelligence projects find inspiration in the image of a consciousness that persists without its original physical form. The Headless Horseman becomes a symbol of the possibility that intelligence might exist independently of biological substrate. Virtual reality developers create increasingly sophisticated simulations of supernatural encounters, allowing users to experience the Headless Horseman legend in ways that feel immediate and visceral. These technological developments raise questions about the nature of reality and the boundaries between authentic and simulated experience. Philosophers and ethicists debate the implications of creating artificial beings that might possess consciousness or awareness. The Headless Horseman legend provides a cultural reference point for discussing what it means to be conscious and how identity relates to physical embodiment. These technological developments demonstrate how the legend continues to serve as a vehicle for exploring fundamental questions about human nature and consciousness. The Headless Horseman becomes a figure that helps us understand our own relationship to technology and artificial intelligence. You walk through contemporary discussions of mental health and psychological well-being, where the Headless Horseman legend finds new applications as a therapeutic tool and metaphor for psychological healing. Mental health professionals discover that supernatural narratives can provide powerful frameworks for understanding and treating various forms of psychological distress. Therapists working with clients who have experienced traumatic brain injuries find that the memory loss and dementia use the Headless Horseman story to explore themes of identity and continuity of self. The ghostly figure becomes a symbol of how aspects of personality and memory can persist even when cognitive function is impaired. Art therapists incorporate Headless Horseman imagery into their work with clients who have difficulty expressing traumatic experiences verbally. Drawing and sculpting representations of the ghostly rider allows people to externalize and work with difficult emotions in non-verbal ways. These therapeutic applications demonstrate the legend's continued relevance to contemporary understanding of psychological health and healing. The Headless Horseman becomes a tool for helping people navigate complex emotional and cognitive challenges. You find yourself in discussions of social justice and historical accountability, where the Headless Horseman legend is being re-examined through the lens of decolonization and racial justice. Scholars and activists are exploring how the story reflects and perpetuates certain attitudes toward violence, foreignness, and cultural difference. Indigenous scholars point out that the Lenape people's understanding of the landscape's spiritual significance has been largely erased from popular versions of the Headless Horseman legend. They work to restore awareness of the indigenous foundations that underlie the supernatural traditions of the Hudson Valley. Historians examine the role of Hessian soldiers in the Revolutionary War, exploring how these German mercenaries have been demonized in American folklore. They work to humanize these forgotten figures and understand their experiences as displaced persons, caught up in conflicts they did not choose. Community organizers use the Headless Horseman legend as a starting point for discussions about historical trauma and its ongoing effects on contemporary communities. The ghostly figure becomes a symbol of how past violence continues to affect present-day social relationships. These social justice interpretations demonstrate how traditional folklore can be re-examined and reinterpreted to serve progressive political goals. The Headless Horseman becomes a vehicle for exploring themes of historical accountability and social healing. You observe how the COVID-19 pandemic has influenced new interpretations of the Headless Horseman legend, as people around the world grapple with themes of illness, death, and social isolation. The ghostly figure takes on new meanings related to collective trauma and community resilience. Artists create works that use Headless Horseman imagery, process their experiences of loss and uncertainty. The Headless Horseman legend provides a framework for understanding how traumatic events can continue to affect individuals and communities. Online communities form around shared interests in supernatural phenomena and ghost stories, providing social connection for people who are physically isolated. The Headless Horseman becomes a focal point for virtual gatherings and digital storytelling projects. These pandemic-era interpretations demonstrate the legend's continued ability to adapt to new circumstances and serve contemporary needs. The Headless Horseman becomes a figure that helps people understand their own experiences of crisis and recovery. You walk through current discussions of artificial intelligence and machine learning, where researchers are exploring questions about consciousness, identity, and the nature of mind. The Headless Horseman legend provides a cultural reference point for these cutting-edge scientific and philosophical investigations. Computer scientists working on neural networks and machine learning algorithms find inspiration in the image of a consciousness that persists independently of its original physical form. The Headless Horseman becomes a metaphor for the possibility of uploading human consciousness to digital systems. Ethicists debate the implications of creating artificial beings that might possess awareness or consciousness. The legend provides a framework for discussing what rights and protections such entities might deserve if they achieve some form of sentience. Science fiction writers explore scenarios where artificial intelligences develop their own forms of consciousness and identity, sometimes using Headless Horseman imagery to represent the alien nature of machine consciousness. The ghostly figure becomes a symbol of intelligence that exists outside familiar biological categories. These contemporary technological discussions demonstrate how the legend continues to serve as a vehicle for exploring fundamental questions about consciousness and identity. The Headless Horseman becomes a figure that helps us understand our own relationship to emerging technologies and artificial intelligence. You find yourself in contemplation of the legend's role in contemporary education and child development. Teachers and educators have discovered that the Headless Horseman story can serve important functions in helping young people understand complex concepts about history, literature, and psychology. Elementary school teachers use simplified versions of the legend to introduce students to American history and the Revolutionary War period. The Headless Horseman authors use supernatural elements to comment on social and psychological themes. Psychology educators use the Headless Horseman legend to illustrate concepts related to fear, trauma, and the persistence of memory. The story provides concrete examples that help students understand abstract psychological principles. These educational applications demonstrate the legend's continued value as a teaching tool and cultural resource. The Headless Horseman becomes a bridge between academic subjects and lived experience, helping students understand complex concepts through engaging narrative. You observe how contemporary environmental movements have embraced the Headless Horseman legend as a symbol of ecological awareness and environmental justice. The ghostly rider becomes a figure that represents the consequences of environmental destruction and the need for sustainable development. Climate activists use Headless Horseman imagery in their protests and awareness campaigns, suggesting that the choices made today will continue to haunt future generations. The ghostly figure becomes a symbol of environmental debt and intergenerational responsibility. Conservation organizations create educational materials that use the Hudson Valley setting of the original story to teach about ecological preservation and habitat protection. The Headless Horseman becomes a guardian spirit of the natural world, reminding people of their responsibilities to the environment. Environmental artists create installations and performances that use the legend's imagery to comment on species extinction and ecosystem destruction. The ghostly rider becomes a representation of all the creatures and landscapes that have been lost to human activity. These environmental interpretations demonstrate how traditional folklore can be reappropriated to serve contemporary political and social goals. The Headless Horseman becomes a voice for the natural world, speaking on behalf of those who cannot speak for themselves. You walk through the complex landscape of contemporary media and entertainment, where the Headless Horseman legend continues to find new expressions and reach new audiences. Streaming services, podcast networks, and social media platforms provide countless opportunities for creative reinterpretation and cultural commentary. Podcast creators produce elaborate audio dramas that use sophisticated sound design and immersive storytelling techniques to bring the legend to life for contemporary audiences. The Headless Horseman becomes a figure that exists primarily in the realm of sound and imagination, creating intimate connections with listeners. Social media influencers create content that play experiences that allow players to explore detailed recreations of Sleepy Hollow and encounter the ghostly rider in personalized ways. The Headless Horseman becomes a character whose behavior adapts to player choices and actions. These contemporary media adaptations demonstrate the legend's continued vitality and relevance to popular culture. The Headless Horseman remains a compelling figure that can capture imagination and inspire creativity across multiple platforms and formats. You find yourself considering how the legend serves as a lens for understanding contemporary anxieties about technology, globalization, and social change. The Headless Horseman becomes a symbol for all the ways that rapid change can feel disorienting and threatening to established ways of life. Business leaders and organizational consultants use the Headless Horseman metaphor to discuss the challenges of managing change and maintaining corporate culture during periods of rapid transformation. The ghostly figure becomes a symbol of institutional memory and the persistence of organizational identity. Sociologists study how traditional communities adapt to globalization and technological change, using the Headless Horseman legend as an example of how local cultures can maintain their distinctiveness while engaging with broader cultural forces. Political commentators invoke Headless Horseman imagery to discuss various social and political phenomena, from the persistence of historical grievances to the challenge of addressing systemic injustices. The legend provides a framework for understanding how past events continue to influence present circumstances. These contemporary applications demonstrate the legend's flexibility as a cultural symbol and its continued relevance to understanding complex social and political dynamics. The Headless Horseman becomes a figure that helps people make sense of rapid change and uncertainty. You observe how the legend continues to evolve in response to changing demographics and cultural diversity in American society. New voices and perspectives are contributing to the ongoing development of the Headless Horseman story, adding layers of meaning that reflect contemporary values and concerns. Immigrant communities bring their own supernatural traditions to America, creating hybrid folklores that blend elements from different cultural backgrounds. The Headless Horseman becomes part of a richer, more diverse tapestry of supernatural narratives that reflect the complexity of contemporary American identity. Multicultural educators use the legend as a starting point for exploring how different cultures understand death, the supernatural, and the relationship between the living and the creative reinterpretations demonstrate how folklore continues to evolve and adapt to changing social conditions. These multicultural interpretations show how the Headless Horseman legend continues to serve as a vehicle for cultural expression and cross-cultural dialogue. The story becomes a meeting ground where different traditions can encounter and enrich each other. You contemplate how the legend serves as a repository of collective memory and cultural wisdom, preserving important insights about human nature and the human condition that remain relevant across generations. The Headless Horseman becomes a teacher and guide, offering lessons about mortality, justice, and the persistence of consciousness. The story reminds us that actions have consequences that extend beyond individual lifetimes, that violence and injustice create wounds that may take generations to heal. The ghostly rider becomes a symbol of accountability and the need for moral responsibility in human relationships. The legend also suggests that consciousness and identity may be more complex and resilient than purely materialist philosophies would suggest. The Headless Horseman represents the possibility that something essential about human nature persists beyond physical death, offering hope to those who struggle with mortality and meaninglessness. The seasonal return of the legend in popular culture creates regular opportunities for communities to reflect on these deeper themes and renew their connection to fundamental questions about life and death. The Headless Horseman becomes an annual reminder of mystery and wonder in an increasingly rational and technological world. These philosophical dimensions of the legend demonstrate its enduring value as a source of wisdom and insight. The Headless Horseman becomes a figure that helps people navigate the deepest questions and challenges of human existence. As you reach the end of this extended journey through the landscapes of legend and meaning, you realize that the Headless Horseman story has revealed itself to be far more than a simple ghost tale. It is a complex cultural artifact that contains multiple layers of meaning and serves numerous functions in human society. The legend provides a framework for understanding traumatic experience and collective memory, offering metaphors and symbols that help people process difficult emotions and experiences. It serves as a vehicle for cultural transmission, preserving important values and insights across generations. The story also functions as a form of entertainment and artistic expression, inspiring countless creative works that enrich human culture and imagination. It provides opportunity and technological progress. The story insists that there are aspects of reality that resist easy explanation and quantification. The legend continues to evolve and adapt, finding new expressions and meanings that reflect contemporary concerns and values. It demonstrates the resilience and flexibility of human storytelling traditions, showing how ancient narratives can remain relevant and compelling for modern audiences. As you prepare to leave this realm of myst and mystery, you carry with you a deeper understanding of how stories shape human consciousness and culture. The Headless Horseman has served as your guide through territories of meaning that extend far beyond the boundaries of Sleepy Hollow. The sound of hoofbeats fades now into the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, reminding you that the boundary between waking and sleeping, between rational thought and imaginative vision, is thinner than you might have believed. The Headless Horseman rides on through the landscapes of human consciousness, waiting for the next dreamer to join him on his eternal journey. through the mysteries of existence. You find yourself walking through a moonlit library, where ancient books whisper secrets to each other in the darkness. The volumes contain countless variations of the Headless Horseman story, each one a testament to humanity's endless fascination with the boundary between life and death. The pages flutter softly as you pass, like the wings of moths drawn to an invisible flame. Here, in this sanctuary of stories, you discover versions of the legend that have never been written down, but exist only in the collective memory of those who have heard them told around campfires and in quiet bedrooms. These oral traditions carry subtle nuances that resist capture in written form, inflections of voice and gesture that can only be transmitted from storyteller to listener in intimate settings. You listen to the stories that children tell each other when adults are not around, versions of the Headless Horseman tale that have been filtered through young imaginations and adapted to address the specific fears and concerns of childhood. In these tellings, the ghostly rider becomes less threatening and more mysterious, a figure of wonder rather than terror. The children's versions often emphasize the horseman's loneliness rather than his frightening appearance. They imagine him searching not for victims to terrorize, but for friends who might understand his eternal wandering. These innocent reinterpretations reveal something profound about the human need for connection and compassion. In the deepest corners of the library, you discover manuscripts written by scholars who have spent their entire careers studying the psychological and anthropological dimensions of the Headless Horseman legend. Their research reveals patterns and connections that span cultures and centuries, suggesting that this particular story taps into fundamental aspects of human consciousness. These academic works explore how the image of decapitation appears in mythologies around the world, from Celtic tales of severed heads that continue to speak prophecies to Buddhist stories of monks who achieve enlightenment through meditation on death and impermanence. The Headless Horseman becomes part of a global tradition of supernatural narratives that help humans confront mortality. You read about fieldwork conducted by anthropologists who have traveled to remote communities where versions of the Headless Rider legend persist in local folklore. These researchers document how the story adapts to different cultural contexts while maintaining its essential elements, demonstrating the universal appeal of narratives about consciousness that survives physical destruction. The academic research reveals how the legend functions as a form of cultural DNA, carrying important information about community values and beliefs across generations. Like genetic material that preserves essential biological characteristics, the Headless Horseman story preserves essential psychological and spiritual insights that remain relevant regardless of changing external circumstances. You walk now through a gallery where contemporary artists have created installations inspired by the Headless Horseman legend. Their works explore the story's themes through sculpture, video, sound, and interactive media, creating immersive experiences that allow visitors to encounter the ghostly rider in entirely new ways. One installation consists of a room filled with mirrors that reflect distorted images of visitors, creating the disorienting sensation of seeing oneself without a head. The piece explores themes of identity and self-perception, asking viewers to consider what aspects of the self might persist, even when familiar markers of identity are removed. Another work uses holographic technology to project ghostly figures that appear and disappear as viewers move through the space. The Headless Horseman manifests as a shimmering apparition that seems to exist in the borderland between reality and imagination, challenging conventional assumptions about the nature of perception and consciousness. A sound installation fills a darkened room with the rhythmic beat of hoofbeats that seem to approach from different directions, creating an auditory landscape that demonstrates how the Headless Horseman legend continues to inspire creative exploration and innovation. Contemporary artists find in the story a rich source of imagery and symbolism that speaks to current concerns about identity, technology, and the nature of reality. You discover a meditation center where spiritual practitioners use the Headless Horseman legend as a focus for contemplative practice. They have developed guided meditations that use imagery from Irving's story to explore themes of impermanence, consciousness, and the dissolution of ego boundaries. In these practices, the Headless Horseman becomes a teacher rather than a frightening figure. His lack of a head represents the Buddhist concept of no self, the idea that what we consider to be our fixed identity is actually an illusion that prevents us from experiencing deeper truths about reality. Meditation instructors guide students through visualizations where they imagine themselves as the headless rider, experiencing consciousness without the usual boundaries of individual identity. These exercises are designed to help practitioners understand how awareness can exist independently of the physical structures that normally define the self. The spiritual interpretation of the legend draws connections between Irving's ghost story and ancient wisdom traditions that use contemplation of death and impermanence as tools for spiritual development. The headless horseman becomes a symbol of the awakened consciousness that has transcended attachment to physical form. These meditative practices demonstrate how supernatural narratives can serve contemplative functions, providing imagery and metaphors that support deep spiritual exploration. The legend becomes a bridge between popular culture and esoteric wisdom, making profound spiritual concepts accessible through familiar storytelling. You find yourself in a research laboratory, where neuroscientists study the effects of ghost stories on brain function and neural activity. Using advanced imaging techniques, they monitor how people's brains respond to encounters with supernatural narratives, like the Headless Horseman legend. The research reveals fascinating patterns of neural activation that occur when people engage with ghost stories. Areas of the brain associated with fear and threat detection become active, but so do regions involved in memory consolidation and meaning-making. The Headless Horseman story triggers complex neural responses that involve both emotional and cognitive processing. Scientists discover that regular exposure to supernatural narratives can actually enhance certain cognitive abilities. People from communities where supernatural beliefs are common show different patterns of brain activation compared to those from more secular environments, suggesting that cultural conditioning shapes even the most basic neurological responses to narrative content. These scientific investigations reveal how deeply supernatural stories are embedded in human neurology and psychology. The Headless Horseman legend works at fundamental levels of brain function, triggering responses that have been shaped by millions of years of evolutionary development. You walk through a virtual reality laboratory where programmers are creating immersive experiences based on the Headless Horseman legend. Using cutting-edge technology, they construct detailed simulations of Sleepy Hollow that allow users to explore Irving's fictional landscape and encounter the ghostly rider in ways that feel immediate and visceral. The virtual environments incorporate historical research about 18th century architecture, clothing, and daily life, creating authentic representations of the period when Irving's story was set. Users can walk through accurate recreations of Dutch colonial farmhouses, cross the famous bridge, and wander through ancient cemeteries filled with weathered headstones. The Headless Horseman himself is rendered using advanced artificial intelligence that allows him to respond dynamically to user behavior. Different users might encounter entirely different versions of the ghostly rider, depending on their actions and choices within the virtual environment. Some users report profound emotional responses to these virtual encounters, describing feelings of genuine fear, wonder, or spiritual connection. The technology creates experiences that blur the boundaries between fiction and reality, between simulation and authentic supernatural encounter. These virtual reality projects represent the cutting edge of how supernatural narratives might be experienced in the future. The Headless Horseman legend finds new life in digital realms, where imagination and technology merge to create unprecedented forms of storytelling. You discover a support group for people who claim to have had genuine encounters with supernatural phenomena, including alleged sightings of the Headless Horseman. These individuals come together to share their experiences and find community with others who have faced similar challenges to their understanding of reality. Group members describe a wide range of encounters, from brief glimpses of mysterious figures to extended interactions with apparent spirits. While their stories vary in detail, they share common themes about the disorienting effects of supernatural experience and the difficulty of integrating such encounters into conventional understanding of the world. Many parts motivated them to explore alternative approaches to understanding consciousness and reality. The support group provides a safe space for people to discuss experiences that might be dismissed or ridiculed in other contexts. Members find validation and understanding from others who have faced similar challenges to their assumptions about the nature of reality. These contemporary communities demonstrate how supernatural narratives continue to serve important social functions, providing frameworks for understanding unusual experiences and creating connections between people who might otherwise feel isolated or misunderstood. You observe how the Headless Horseman legend has influenced contemporary approaches to grief counseling and bereavement support. Mental health professionals have discovered that supernatural narratives can provide valuable tools for helping people process loss and maintain connections with deceased loved ones. Grief counselors use the image of the Headless Horseman to explore how traumatic loss can create feelings of fragmentation and disconnection. The ghostly rider becomes a symbol for the part of the self that feels severed from life and meaning after experiencing profound loss. Some therapeutic approaches encourage clients to imagine conversations with the Headless Horseman, using the fictional character as a safe way to explore difficult emotions about death and separation. The legendary figure becomes a container for feelings that might be too overwhelming to address directly. The seasonal return of the Headless Horseman in popular culture provides regular opportunities for grieving individuals to engage with themes of death and remembrance in supportive community contexts. Halloween celebrations become occasions for honoring deceased loved ones while processing ongoing grief. These therapeutic applications demonstrate how supernatural narratives can serve healing functions, providing metaphors and frameworks that help people navigate some of life's most challenging experiences. The Headless Horseman becomes a guide through the difficult territory of loss and bereavement. You find yourself in a conference room where business consultants use the Headless Horseman legend as a metaphor for organizational change and corporate transformation. The ghostly rider becomes a symbol for companies that must survive radical changes to their structure and identity. Management theorists explore how organizations can maintain their essential character while adapting to new market conditions and technological disruptions. The Headless Horseman represents the challenge of preserving corporate culture and institutional memory during periods of dramatic change. Leadership development programs use the legend to discuss the importance of maintaining vision and direction, even when familiar determination. Strategic planning consultants apply lessons from the Headless Horseman story to help companies navigate mergers, acquisitions, and other forms of corporate restructuring. The legend provides a framework for understanding how organizations can survive and thrive despite fundamental changes to their structure and operations. These business applications demonstrate the legend's flexibility as a source of metaphors and insights that can be applied to contemporary challenges. The Headless Horseman becomes a teacher for modern organizations facing their own forms of death and rebirth. You walk through a research center where cognitive scientists study how supernatural narratives influence memory formation and recall. Their work reveals fascinating insights about the ways ghost stories, like the Headless Horseman legend, become embedded in human consciousness. Researchers discover that supernatural narratives create particularly vivid and persistent memories due to their combination of familiar and impossible elements. The brain's attempt to process contradictory information creates strong neural traces that resist normal patterns of forgetting. Studies show that people who regularly engage with ghost stories develop enhanced abilities to remember complex narrative details and to maintain multiple interpretations of ambiguous events. The cognitive flexibility required to engage with supernatural narratives strengthens memory systems and creative thinking abilities. The research also reveals how cultural transmission of ghost stories relies on specific psychological mechanisms that ensure accurate preservation of essential story elements, while allowing for creative variation in non-essential details. The Headless Horseman legend demonstrates remarkable stability in its core features across different tellings and cultural contexts. These scientific investigations illuminate how supernatural narratives function as cognitive tools that enhance human mental abilities and cultural transmission systems. The Headless Horseman story works at fundamental levels of human psychology to create lasting impressions and meaningful connections between individuals and communities. You discover a community garden where local residents have created a memorial space dedicated to the victims of historical violence and trauma. The Headless Horseman legend serves as inspiration for this peaceful sanctuary, where people come to reflect on the persistence of memory and the possibility of healing. Garden paths wind through plantings that change with the seasons, creating a living metaphor for the cycles of death and renewal that are central to the Headless Horseman story, a place where the boundary between past and present feels thin and permeable. Educational signs throughout the space provide information about local history and the cultural significance of the Headless Horseman legend, helping visitors understand the connections between fictional narratives and real historical events. This memorial garden demonstrates how supernatural narratives can inspire concrete actions that serve community healing and education. The Headless Horseman legend becomes a catalyst for creating spaces where people can process grief and connect with larger patterns of meaning. As you prepare to conclude this extensive journey through the many dimensions of the Headless Horseman legend, you realize that the story has revealed itself to be a living, breathing entity that continues to evolve and adapt to serve human needs across generations and cultures. The legend functions as a repository of collective wisdom about mortality, consciousness, and the persistence of meaning beyond individual existence. It provides frameworks for understanding traumatic experience, tools for processing grief and loss, and inspiration for creative expression and spiritual expression. Most importantly, the Headless Horseman story reminds us that mystery and wonder remain essential elements of meaningful human existence. In an age increasingly dominated by scientific rationalism and technological solutions, the legend insists that there are aspects of reality that resist easy explanation, and that some questions may be more valuable than their answers. The story's remarkable adaptability ensures that it will continue to find new expressions and serve new functions as human culture evolves and changes. Future generations will undoubtedly discover their own meanings in the image of the Headless Rider, their own ways of using this ancient narrative to address contemporary concerns and challenges. As the mist of story and dream begins to clear around you, you carry with you a deep appreciation for the power of narrative to shape human consciousness and culture. The Headless Horseman has served as your guide through territories of meaning that extend far beyond the boundaries of any single story or place. The gentle rhythm of hoofbeats fades into the peaceful silence of approaching dawn, but you know that the ghostly rider continues his eternal journey through the landscapes of human imagination. He waits for the next dreamer who needs to be reminded that death is not the end of consciousness, but perhaps only its transformation into something different and mysterious. Sleep wake the eternal autumn night. The Headless Horseman rides on, and the legend continues, carried forward by dreamers and storytellers into whatever strange new worlds await us in the years to come.